Welcome students, I am Bindu Singh from AISSMS College of Hotel Management and Catering Technology, Pune. I will be introducing you to this session of Environmental Science 1. The topic for today's session will be Conservation of Biodiversity, in situ and ex situ conservation of biodiversity, Part 1. Now, let us take a look at the objectives of this session. First, to understand the term biodiversity and its conservation, to understand importance of biodiversity conservation, and to identify different methods of in situ conservation. Let us see here the definition of biodiversity. Biodiversity is defined as the variety and variability among all groups of living organisms and the ecosystem in which they live. Biodiversity describes the richness and variety of life on Earth. It is the most complex and important feature of our planet. Without biodiversity, life would not sustain. Biodiversity means the variety of life on Earth. It includes all the different plants, animals, and microorganisms, as well as their habitat and ecosystems. Biodiversity is important because it helps ecosystems work smoothly, like how plants give us oxygen, animals pollinate flowers, and forests clean the air. Here in this image, you can see biodiversity in our nature, which shows that biodiversity refers to the diverse kinds of living things in a given area. Biodiversity is documented in 3 levels. First is genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is seen among the organisms of same species due to the genetic differences. For example, the individual human being are different from each other. No two animal or plant are exactly alike. And the second is species diversity. The difference between different species is called species diversity. For example, all the species of plants, animals, and microbes which are seen in any natural environment. And the third is ecosystem diversity. In one region, there may be different ecosystems. Such diversity in the ecosystem is called ecosystem diversity. Ecosystems are natural or artificial. Every region shows different type of ecosystems such as aquatic, terrestrial, desert, or forest ecosystems. Each ecosystem has its own habitat and resident flora and fauna. Let us now see here the importance of biodiversity conservation. First is biodiversity maintains the ecological balance. Second, it helps in the healthy existence of human and other species in the ecosystem, such as an area with a higher species abundance has a more stable ecology than one with a lower species abundance. Third, it helps in high productivity and human wellness. Fourth, biodiversity provides human with valuable genetic diversity because genetic material is the result of millions of years of evolution. Biodiversity preservation is critical. Fifth, biodiversity is good indicator of our interdependence with other living things. For our diverse needs, we rely directly on various plant species Similarly, we depend on numerous animal and microorganism species for various reasons. Sixth, it also signifies each species' contribution and function in maintaining a healthy ecosystem. Let us all remember that biodiversity is being lost due to habitat loss, resource overexploitation, climate change, pollution, invasive exotic species, illnesses, and hunting. It is critical to protect biodiversity since it offers us several economic and ethical benefit and aesthetic value. Now let us understand what is conservation of biodiversity. Protection, restoration, and management of biodiversity in order to derive sustainable benefits for present and future generations, or it can also be defined as the totality of genes, species, and ecosystems in a defined area. So here, biodiversity conservation refers to the protection, preservation, and management of ecosystems and natural habitats, and ensuring that they are healthy and functional. With this statement, we understand that there are three main objectives of biodiversity conservation, that are to protect and preserve species diversity, to ensure sustainable management of species and ecosystem, and prevention and restoration of ecological processes and life support system. Now you can see here two methods of conservation of biodiversity. First is in situ conservation. This means conserving plants, animals, and ecosystems right where they naturally live. It's like preserving a forest or a coral reef in its own habitat. This method focuses on protecting natural areas and managing them sustainably so that all the species living there can thrive. Second method is ex situ conservation. This involves taking plants and animals out of their natural habitat to protect them in a different place. For example, it could mean breeding endangered animal in a zoo or botanical garden, or collecting seeds from rare plants to grow them in a protected environment. Ex situ conservation helps ensure species survival out of their original habitats, especially when those habitats are threatened or destroyed. You will also be able to see different methods of in situ here and ex situ. For example, wildlife sanctuary, national parks, biosphere reserves are some of the methods of in situ conservation, and seed banks, zoo, botanical gardens are example of ex situ conservation method. In this session, we will discuss in situ conservation method in detail, and in our next session we will cover ex situ conservation method. Now let us understand what is in situ conservation. In situ refers to the preservation and protection of the species in their natural habitat. In situ conservation involves the management of biodiversity in the same area where it is found. Now let us understand some of the advantages of in situ conservation method. First, it preserves species as well as their natural habitat. In situ conservation helps in conservation of plant and animal species in their environment, since animal and plant live with natural threat like poaching and predation. Second advantage of in situ conservation is it ensures protection to a large number of populations, so various living organisms can be conserved at the same time. Third advantage of in situ conservation is it is economic and convenient method of conservation, as in situ conservation occurs in places like national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. Fourth, it does not require species to adjust to a new habitat. They can evolve better and can easily get adapted to various environmental conditions. Whereas, to add here, the disadvantages of in situ conservation are fear of natural threats like predation and poaching, uncontrollable factors like diseases and climate change that might lead to extinction of some species, etc. Let us now understand various methods of in situ conservation in detail. Here you will be able to see different methods of in situ conservation such as biosphere reserves, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, biodiversity hotspots, gene sanctuary and sacred groves. We will discuss these methods in detail in further slides. Let us now understand biosphere reserve, which is one of the method of in situ conservation. These are national government nominated sites, large areas often up to 5,000 square kilometer of an ecosystem where the traditional lifestyle and natural habitat of inhabitants of that ecosystem are protected. They are mostly open for tourists and researchers. Here, let us all know that each biosphere reserve is supposed to fulfill three harmonizing functions such as conservation function to conserve genetic resources, species, ecosystem and landscapes. Second is development function to promote sustainable human and economic development. And third is logistic support function to provide support to research and analyzing the issue of conservation and sustainable development. And examples of biosphere reserves are Sundarban, Nanda Devi, Nokrek and Manas in India. Here in this map of India, you will be able to see various biosphere reserves of India. Biosphere reserves are areas of terrestrial and coastal or marine ecosystem or its amalgamation. The Biosphere Reserve Network was launched in the year 1971 by UNESCO, 2 years after the initiation of Man and the Biosphere Program. The Government of India established 18 biosphere in the country, which you can see in this map here. In this diagram, you will be able to see three main zones of biosphere reserves marked as 1, 2 and 3. Let us understand core area, which is marked as number 3 here in this diagram. They comprise a strictly protected zone that contribute to the conservation of landscapes, ecosystem, species and genetic variation. Buffer zone, which is marked as number 2, is they surround or adjoin the core areas and are used for activities compatible with sound ecological practices that can reinforce scientific research, monitoring, training and the education. Zone which is marked as 1, that is transition area. The transition area is where communities foster socio-culturally and ecologically sustainable economic and human activities. Moving ahead, let us now see another method of in situ conservation is national parks. These are limited reserves maintained by the government for the conservation of wildlife as well as environment. Human activities are prohibited in national parks and they are solely dedicated to the protection of natural fauna of the area. They mostly occupy an area of 100 to 500 square kilometer. There are a total of 104 national parks in India right now. The national parks may even be within a biosphere reserve. These are small reserves that are protected and maintained by the government. Its boundaries are well protected, where human activities such as grazing, forestry, habitat and cultivation are restricted. National parks play a very important role, such as they protect wildlife and their habitat from human impact and destruction. They provide animals a safe space to survive and reproduce. They protect places of natural beauty and are home to several endemic species. They also protect the places which are essential to aboriginal people. An example of national parks are Kanha National Park, Gir National Park, Kaziranga National Park and so on. Let us now understand next method of in situ conservation is wildlife sanctuaries. Wildlife sanctuaries are protected areas meant only for conservation of wild animals. A few human activities such as cultivation, wood collection and other forest product collection are allowed here, but they must not interfere with the conservation of animals. Tourist visits are also allowed in these areas. There are total of 551 wildlife sanctuaries in India. These are the places where only wild animal can be found. Certain human activities like timber harvesting, cultivation, collection of woods and other forest products are permitted unless they interfere with the conservation project. Recreation tourism is also permitted, and examples of wildlife sanctuaries are Ghana Bird Sanctuary, Abohar Wildlife Sanctuary, Madumalai Wildlife Sanctuary, etc. Let us now understand next method of in situ conservation, that is biodiversity hotspot. A biodiversity hotspot are the areas of conservation where there is strictly a minimum of 1500 species of vascular plants and a habitat that has lost its 70% cover. These are protected areas for various purposes where the wildlife inhabitant lifestyle and domesticated plants and animals are conserved. Tourist and research activities are allowed here too. And example of biodiversity hotspots are the Himalayas, the Western Ghats, the Northeast and the Nicobar Islands. Here in this map, you will be able to see biodiversity hotspots of India highlighted in different colors. Let us now understand next method of in situ conservation, that is gene sanctuary. Gene sanctuary is a conservation area reserved only for plants. India has its only gene sanctuary set up in Garo Hills of Meghalaya for the conservation of wild species of citrus. Plans to open more such sanctuaries are underway. Having gene sanctuary have main advantages like it protect the loss of genetic diversity caused by human intervention, and it allows natural selection and evolution to operate. It also has some of the drawbacks such as entire variability of a crop species cannot be conserved, and its maintenance and establishment is a difficult task, but still it is considered as a very good method of in situ conservation. Let us now understand next method of in situ conservation, that is sacred groves. Sacred groves are conserved areas for wildlife protected by the communities due to the religious belief. It is mostly a part of forest where its wildlife is given complete protection. Sacred groves preserve a rich religious and socio-cultural heritage of Indian biodiversity from ancient times due to their values. They act as a bridge between man and the nature. Groves help to improve soil quality, replenish water resources, and are pivotal for biodiversity conservation of plants and animals, including rare, endemic, threatened, vulnerable species and ethnobotanical species. Most of the India's sacred groves are associated with a deity or a spiritual being who protects the grove and local people. Sacred groves are tracts of forest which are regenerated around places of worship. Sacred groves are found in Rajasthan, Western Ghats of Karnataka and Maharashtra, Meghalaya and Madhya Pradesh. Sacred groves help in protection of many rare, threatened and endemic species of plants and animals found in an area. The process of deforestation is strictly prohibited in this region by tribals. Let us now conclude this session and understand that conservation of biodiversity is vital for maintaining the Earth's environment and sustaining life on the planet. There are a number of ways in which the richness of biodiversity helps in maintaining the ecological system. Conservation of biodiversity is important for the survival of living beings on Earth. Hence, a lot of emphasis is being given on the conservation of biodiversity these days. Conservation of biodiversity is of utmost importance. We must all make efforts to conserve biodiversity rather than contributing towards its declination. Thus, the richness of biodiversity is essential for the survival of living beings on Earth. Thank you.